I'm Margaret Wilson, 67 years old, and still adjusting to life without Frank after 40 years of marriage. When my 3 adult children invited me for a countryside weekend, saying they missed me, my heart nearly burst with joy. I packed my favorite recipes, medications, and comfortable shoes, eager to reconnect with Amanda, Brian, and Carolyn. Little did I know that 2 days later, I'd wake to an empty house and a cruel note. You slow us down. Before I continue this story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly. I was born in a small Nebraska town where everyone knew your business before you did. My parents ran the local hardware store, working from sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. I learned the value of hard work watching them, a lesson I carried into my own life. After high school, I earned a teaching degree and moved to suburban Chicago, where I met Frank Wilson at a community softball game. He was coaching, I was keeping score. Within a year we were married. Frank worked as an accountant while I taught 4th grade at Elmwood Elementary. We saved every penny to buy our modest 3-bedroom home on Maple Street, with its small backyard and flowering crabapple tree. We were so proud when we paid off the mortgage just before Frank's retirement. Our children came along in fairly quick succession. Amanda, our firstborn, arrived when I was 24. She was always my serious child, organizing her toys by color before she could even name the colors. Now 43, Amanda works as a marketing executive for a major corporation. Always flying somewhere, always rushing. She has 2 teenagers I rarely see, both too busy with sports and activities to visit their grandmother. Brian followed 3 years later. My only son was the dreamer, always taking things apart to see how they worked. He now runs his own tech company in San Francisco, creating software I pretend to understand when he explains it. At 40, he remains unmarried, married instead to his work, his apartment filled with gadgets instead of family photos. Carolyn, my baby, came as a surprise when I was 29. She was our free spirit who somehow channeled her creativity into becoming a disciplined physician. Recently divorced at 38, she has 1 child, my sweet granddaughter Lucy, who I see primarily through FaceTime calls that always seem to end too quickly. Frank and I had a good marriage. Not perfect, what marriage is, but solid. We complemented each other. He was analytical and deliberate, while I brought spontaneity and warmth to our family. The children adored him, especially as teenagers when they found me too emotional, too involved. Mom, you're smothering us, they'd complain while seeking out their father for advice. When the children were young, our house buzzed with activity, soccer practices, science projects, piano lessons. I volunteered at their schools, knew their friends, their teachers, their favorite snacks. We ate dinner together most nights, a practice I insisted upon despite increasingly busy schedules. Those years were exhausting but fulfilling. Things began to change when they left for college. Each departure created a palpable void in our home. Frank and I relearned how to be a couple rather than parents. We traveled some, joined a bowling league, found new rhythms. I continued teaching, finding purpose in other people's children while missing my own. The geographic distance grew as they established careers in different cities. Holiday gatherings became complicated negotiations around work schedules and competing in-law families. I learned to settle for whatever time they could give, treasuring the brief visits and accepting the increasingly brief phone calls. Frank's death from a sudden heart attack 3 years ago shattered my world. 40 years together, gone in an instant while he was mowing the lawn on a Tuesday afternoon. The children flew in for the funeral, handled arrangements efficiently, and departed within days, leaving me alone in a house suddenly too large and too quiet. Call anytime, Mom, they said. But when I did, I could hear the impatience in their voices, the background sounds of their busy lives continuing while I interrupted. Weekly calls became monthly, conversations growing shorter. I stopped sharing my sadness, my loneliness, not wanting to burden them. Instead, I asked about their lives, their children, their work, safe topics that wouldn't make them uncomfortable. My health wasn't perfect. Mild arthritis in my knees, slightly diminished hearing, the usual complaints of aging, but nothing that truly limited me. Still, I noticed my children treating me as increasingly fragile, exchanging glances when I couldn't hear something or wince while standing up. Are you sure you can manage that, Mom? became a common refrain. Even for simple tasks I'd done all my life. I found myself excluded from family events without discussion. We didn't invite you to Lucy's soccer tournament because it was such a long drive, Mom. We thought the museum would involve too much walking for you. Each exclusion delivered with concern that masked something else. Inconvenience. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket after Frank's passing. The house held too many memories, too many echoes. I joined a grief support group at the local community center. Made a few acquaintances but not true friends. Most nights I ate dinner alone watching television shows I didn't really follow just to hear human voices. When Brian called with the weekend invitation, it seemed like a miracle. "We miss you, Mom," he said. "Amanda found this great rental house in the countryside. Just the four of us like old times." I hung up the phone and cried with happiness, believing my children had finally recognized my loneliness, my need for connection. How wrong I was. The invitation came on a dreary Tuesday in April. I was sorting through Frank's old fishing gear, finally ready to donate it after 3 years. When the phone rang and I saw Brian's name, I answered immediately, as I always did when my children called. "Mom," he said, sounding unusually enthusiastic, "I've been talking with Amanda and Carolyn. We all feel it's been too long since we've spent quality time together." My heart quickened. "That would be wonderful, sweetheart. Amanda found this perfect rental house in Wisconsin, about 3 hours from you. Rustic but comfortable, on several acres with hiking trails nearby. We thought maybe next weekend? All of us, no spouses or kids, just like when we were younger." I gripped the phone tighter. "I'd love that more than anything, Brian." "Great. I'll text you the address. Plan to arrive Friday afternoon. We'll all drive separately since we're coming from different directions." After we hung up, I sat among Frank's fishing rods with happy tears streaming down my face. My children missed me. They wanted time with me. The dark cloud that had hovered since Frank's death seemed to lift slightly. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation. I went to the grocery store, selecting ingredients for my children's favorite dishes: Amanda's beloved chicken pot pie, Brian's favorite chocolate chip cookies, the blueberry pancakes Carolyn requested every birthday. I imagined cooking in a country kitchen, sharing meals and memories, reconnecting as a family. I packed carefully comfortable clothes, walking shoes, my medications, Frank's old binoculars for birdwatching, a photo album I'd assembled of their childhood pictures. Practical items, sentimental items, all chosen to facilitate the reconnection I craved. Friday morning dawned bright and clear. I loaded my 10-year-old Toyota and hit the road by 8, wanting plenty of time for the drive. The route took me through small towns and past farms preparing for spring planting. I stopped once for coffee and a bathroom break, then continued north, rehearsing stories to share, questions to ask, ways to bridge the distance that had grown between us. The rental house appeared after I turned down a gravel lane lined with budding trees. It was charming, a 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, weathered red barn in the distance, and an old tractor parked in the side yard. The property backed up to woodlands just beginning to green with spring. No other houses were visible, giving the place a peaceful isolation. I was the first to arrive, finding the key under a flower pot as instructed. Inside, the house was rustic but comfortable. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, kitchen with modern appliances but vintage charm. For bedrooms upstairs, each with handmade quilts on the beds. I claimed the smallest room, not wanting to seem presumptuous. Amanda arrived next, her sleek BMW raising dust on the gravel drive. She greeted me with a quick hug before checking her phone messages. "Traffic was terrible," she said. "I'm already behind on emails." She disappeared upstairs with her designer luggage, returning after 30 minutes looking somehow both more relaxed and more polished in casual clothes that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Brian and Carolyn arrived within minutes of each other, both immediately connecting to the house's Wi-Fi before properly settling in. "Poor reception out here," Brian complained, holding his phone toward different windows. Carolyn at least gave me a genuine hug, asking about my drive while simultaneously texting someone. That first evening held promise. I prepared dinner while they unpacked and explored the property. We ate at the large farmhouse table, and for a while, conversation flowed almost naturally. Amanda described a marketing campaign she was developing, Brian explained his latest software project in terms I could almost understand, and Carolyn shared stories about hospital life. When I mentioned missing their father, however, a subtle shift occurred. Brief glances exchanged, a slight clearing of throats. Then Brian deftly changed the subject. I recognized the pattern from previous attempts to discuss Frank or my loneliness. My children were uncomfortable with my grief, preferring to keep conversations light and impersonal. After dinner, they migrated to the porch with wine glasses, phones continuously chiming with messages. I joined them, trying to participate in conversations that increasingly excluded me. Discussions about investments I couldn't contribute to, people from their professional lives I didn't know, television shows I hadn't seen. Eventually, I excused myself, claiming fatigue from the drive. "Good night, Mom. Sleep well," they called as I climbed the stairs. From my bedroom, I could hear their conversations growing more animated, laughter floating up more freely now that I wasn't present. I lay awake for hours, hoping tomorrow would bring the connection I so desperately sought, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. I woke at 6 the next morning, habit from decades of early rising for school. The house was silent as I crept downstairs, wanting to prepare a special breakfast before my children awoke. The kitchen was well equipped, and I soon had coffee brewing, bacon sizzling, and blueberry pancake batter ready. By 8:30, I had a feast: prepared pancakes keeping warm in the oven, bacon, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and coffee. No one appeared. By 9, I knocked gently on bedroom doors, calling, "Breakfast is ready." Mumbled acknowledgments followed, but no one emerged. It was nearly 10 when they finally came downstairs, each with phone in hand, each mumbling about poor sleep or uncomfortable mattresses. The pancakes were rubbery by then, the eggs cold, the coffee reheated. "You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble, Mom," Amanda said, selecting a single pancake and some fruit. "It's no trouble," I assured her, hiding my disappointment. "I love cooking for you all." "We should plan our day," Brian said, scrolling through his phone. "There are hiking trails nearby that look interesting, and a winery about 20 miles away offering tastings." "Hiking sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely excited. "I brought my walking shoes." They exchanged those glances again, the ones that passed information without words, a family shorthand that now excluded me. "The trails are rated moderate to difficult," Carolyn said carefully. "There are some pretty steep sections." "I can manage," I insisted, perhaps too quickly. "My arthritis isn't that bad." Another exchange of glances, then Brian shrugged. "If you're sure, Mom, we'll take it slow." The truth was I wasn't sure, but I would have walked over hot coals to spend time with my children. We finished breakfast, cleaned up, and prepared for our hike. I took my time climbing the stairs to change, aware of whispered conversations behind me. The trailhead was just beyond the property line, a dirt path disappearing into woods thick with birch and pine. The spring air felt crisp and clean, birds calling from the branches above. For a moment, I felt genuine happiness. Outdoors with my 3 children, just as when they were young and we took weekend nature walks. That feeling faded quickly as they set a pace I struggled to match. My knees protested each incline, but I pushed through the discomfort, determined not to be left behind. They walked ahead, engaged in conversations I couldn't quite hear, occasionally remembering to stop and wait for me to catch up. "You okay, Mom?" Carolyn asked during one such stop, her physician's eyes assessing me professionally. "Just enjoying the scenery," I lied, trying to hide my labored breathing. "It's beautiful here." "We're slowing down for you," Amanda said, not unkindly but matter-of-factly. "We could be at the lookout point by now." "I'm sorry," I said automatically. "Please don't feel you need to wait. I can follow at my own pace." "We're not leaving you behind, Mom," Brian said, but the impatience in his voice belied his words. "Just try to keep up a bit better, okay?" I nodded, swallowing hurt and embarrassment. When we continued, I pushed harder, ignoring the shooting pain in my knees, the tightness in my chest. The path grew steeper, roots and rocks creating treacherous footing. I nearly fell twice but caught myself, grateful my children hadn't noticed. The lookout point, when we finally reached it, offered a spectacular view of rolling hills and a distant lake. For a few precious minutes, we stood together admiring the vista, a brief moment of connection as I pointed out birds with Frank's binoculars and shared them with my children. Carolyn took a photo of the three of us, my first picture with all my children in over 2 years. The descent proved even more challenging than the climb. By the time we returned to the house, my knees were screaming in protest, and I was fighting tears of pain and frustration. My children, barely winded, immediately checked their phones for messages missed during our 3-hour excursion. "There's a nice restaurant in town for lunch," Amanda suggested. "Then maybe that winery afterward?" The thought of sitting in a restaurant then a winery seemed both appealing and daunting. My body needed rest, but my heart needed time with my children. "That sounds lovely," I said, hiding a wince as I sat to change shoes. The restaurant was charming, housed in a converted mill beside a small river. We were seated quickly, and I savored being out with my adult children, pretending we were just a normal family enjoying a weekend together. But as conversation turned to business matters, tech innovations, and medical advancements, I found myself once again excluded, unable to contribute meaningfully. "How about that winery now?" Brian suggested as we finished lunch. "It's supposed to have amazing views along with good wines." I saw my opening. "Why don't you three go ahead? I might rest a bit this afternoon." The hike was more challenging than I expected. The relief on their faces was unmistakable and crushing. "Are you sure, Mom?" Carolyn asked, already reaching for her purse. "Absolutely. Enjoy yourselves. I'll prepare something special for dinner." They left me at the house with barely disguised eagerness, promising to return by 6. I watched their cars disappear down the gravel road, then limped inside to take pain medication and rest my throbbing knees. The house felt enormously empty without them, even though their presence had brought more pain than comfort. I dozed on the sofa, waking with enough time to prepare a roast chicken dinner. By 6:30, with no sign of them and no response to my text message, I put the food in the oven to keep warm. They arrived at 7:45, slightly intoxicated, full of stories about the wonderful people they'd met at the winery, the exceptional wines they'd tasted, the cheese plate they'd shared. "Sorry we're late, Mom," Brian said casually. "We lost track of time." "The chicken looks a little dry," Amanda commented as I served dinner. "It's been keeping warm for nearly 2 hours, I said quietly. Carolyn at least had the grace to look embarrassed. "We should have called. The reception was spotty." Dinner passed with more wine opened, more stories shared about their afternoon. Stories that pointedly excluded me. I cleared plates, declined help with cleanup, and suggested a board game afterward, hoping to salvage something from the evening. We played Scrabble, a family tradition. In the past, I'd often won, my vocabulary enhanced by decades of reading and teaching. Tonight, I struggled to concentrate, my play slow and uninspired. "Mom, we've been waiting 5 minutes for your turn," Amanda finally said. "Are you going to play, or should we move on?" "Sorry," I murmured, hastily placing tiles to form a simple word. 7 points, Brian recorded with a sigh. "Mom, you're really slowing down the game." The phrase hit harder than he likely intended. "You're slowing us down." A theme emerging, a truth revealing itself in small moments throughout the day. I was a burden, an obligation, someone to be accommodated rather than enjoyed. I excused myself shortly after, climbing the stairs to my small bedroom where I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo album I'd brought but hadn't shared. Pictures of 3 smiling children who had once loved being with their mother, who had once sought my company rather than tolerated it. What had happened to those children? What had happened to the mother they once adored? Sleep came fitfully, dreams mixing with painful awareness. Tomorrow was our last day together before returning to our separate lives. One last chance to find the connection I'd been hoping for, one last opportunity to bridge the growing chasm between us. I fell asleep clinging to that hope, unwilling to recognize it was already too late. Sunday morning dawned unusually quiet. No sounds of movement, no coffee brewing, no shower running. I glanced at my watch, 7:15 a.m. Perhaps everyone was sleeping in after our active day and late evening. I dressed slowly, giving my stiff knees time to loosen, before carefully descending the stairs. The kitchen stood empty, coffee pot cold. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. No response. I checked the living room, the porch, even peered into the downstairs bathroom. Nothing. A flutter of concern rose in my chest as I climbed back upstairs, this time knocking on bedroom doors. Amanda? Brian? Carolyn? Each door swung open to reveal a neatly made bed, empty drawers, vacant closets. Their rooms had been cleaned out completely, as if they'd never been there. Disbelief warred with a terrible certainty as I returned downstairs, checking the driveway through the front window. No cars. My Toyota sat alone in the gravel drive, the old tractor still parked in the side yard. They were gone. All of them gone. This can't be happening, I whispered, returning to the kitchen. That's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper on the counter, my name written on the outside in Brian's precise handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Mom, we needed to get an early start back to the city for work tomorrow. You were sleeping soundly, and we didn't want to wake you. You seemed to struggle with the pace yesterday. You slow us down and we can't afford to be late. There's cash for a taxi to the train station. Call when you get home safely. Brian, Amanda, and Carolyn. The note fluttered from my fingers to the floor. You slow us down. Not we'll miss you, or thank you for coming, or we love you. Just the cold, hard truth they'd been communicating in 100 small ways throughout our time together. I was a burden, an inconvenience, someone to be left behind. I sank into a kitchen chair, the room spinning slightly. Abandoned. Left behind without even the courtesy of a goodbye, without even checking if I could manage the journey home alone. The cash sat on the counter, $300 in crisp bills, payment for my dismissal. My phone showed no missed calls. No text messages explaining their departure. I called Amanda first, her phone going straight to voicemail. Brian's rang several times before disconnecting without an option to leave a message. Carolyn's phone rang and rang unanswered. I sent text messages to all three. Where are you? Why did you leave without saying goodbye? No responses appeared. The house felt suddenly alien, hostile even. Too quiet, too empty, pressing in with accusatory silence. I walked from room to room, looking for signs they had been there, finding nothing but my own belongings. Had I imagined the entire weekend? No, the note confirmed it had been real as their rejection. I moved to the front porch, wrapping my cardigan tightly around me despite the mild spring morning. The old tractor sat in the yard, rusted but solid, a relic of harder, simpler times. Like me, I thought bitterly, outdated and left behind. Tears welled but didn't fall. I'd cried enough over my children's indifference, shed enough tears over their growing distance. This final abandonment deserved something different than tears. It deserved recognition. They had shown me exactly where I stood in their lives, exactly what I meant to them. The truth hurt unbearably, but perhaps it was a gift too. The gift of clarity. Hours passed as I sat motionless on the porch, processing what had happened. The sun climbed higher, warming the day. Birds called from nearby trees. Life continued all around me while I sat frozen in painful revelation. My children didn't want me in their lives, not really. They had fulfilled an obligation this weekend, checked a box labeled Mom Time, and escaped at the first opportunity. I thought about the taxi money on the counter. The nearest train station was 30 miles away in a town I'd never visited. Once there, I'd need to navigate schedules, tickets, connections to get back to Chicago. They'd assumed I could manage all this alone, or perhaps they hadn't thought about it at all. My phone remained silent. No calls asking if I was okay, no text checking if I'd arranged transportation. The message was unmistakable. My problems were not their concern. I was on my own. As afternoon approached, hunger finally drove me back inside. I mechanically prepared a sandwich from leftover chicken, eating without tasting, drinking water without refreshment. The note still lay on the floor where I dropped it. I picked it up, reading it again, those 5 words burning into my consciousness. You slow us down. I'd spent my life keeping up, with 3 active children, a busy husband, a demanding career. I'd juggled schedules, balanced needs, prioritized everyone above myself. Now, at 67, I apparently no longer moved fast enough for my children's busy lives. My pace had become unacceptable. My presence an inconvenience. The tears finally came then, hot and bitter, streaming down my face as I clutched the note. I cried for the mother I'd been, for the children I'd raised, for the family we'd once been. I cried for Frank, who would have been devastated to see what had become of us. I cried until no more tears would come, until something hard and clear crystallized in their place. They had left me behind, but I was still here. They had abandoned me, but I hadn't disappeared. They had dismissed me, but I refused to accept their assessment of my worth. 67 years old, a bit slower perhaps, but still standing, still breathing, still capable of deciding what happened next. I wouldn't call a taxi. I wouldn't scurry home like an unwanted houseguest. I wouldn't continue to chase the approval of 3 adults who saw me as nothing more than an obligation. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the property, I made a decision. I wouldn't cry anymore. Not for them, not for what we'd lost. This moment marked a turning point. The day Margaret Wilson stopped waiting for her children to see her value and started recognizing it herself. I made a cup of tea, strong and bracing, like my grandmother used to make during difficult times. Tea first, decisions second, she would say, her gnarled hands steady around her chipped porcelain cup. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around my mug, and forced myself to think clearly. This weekend represented a lifetime pattern. Me giving, my children taking, me reaching out, them pulling away. How many school events had I attended? How many late-night fevers had I monitored? How many tears had I dried? I'd stepped back from professional advancement to be present for their activities, declined a department head position because it would have meant less time at home. Every decision filtered through one question. What's best for my children? Now I asked a different question. What's best for me? The memory of a particular moment surfaced, Amanda's college graduation. I'd been offered an opportunity to present at a national teaching conference, a significant professional honor. It fell on the same weekend as her ceremony. When I called to discuss possibly missing the graduation but celebrating afterward, her response was cutting. It's fine, Mom. It's not like it's important or anything. I declined the conference opportunity and attended the graduation, where I sat alone for 2 hours before Amanda appeared for a brief photo, then disappeared with friends. Frank had been traveling for work, unable to attend. Another memory followed Brian's 30th birthday. I'd flown to San Francisco, excited to spend the weekend with my son. He'd been called into work for an emergency the first day, left me waiting at a restaurant for 2 hours the second day, and asked me to leave a day early because something came up. I changed my flight at considerable expense, only to see Instagram photos of him at a party that same evening. Carolyn, too, had perfected the art of dismissal. Last Christmas, she'd invited me to her home, then spent the entire visit on the phone with colleagues or friends, leaving me to entertain her daughter while she occupied herself elsewhere. When I tried to discuss it before leaving, she'd sighed heavily and said, "Not everything is about you, Mom." Frank had seen it happening but urged patience. "They're busy establishing their lives," he'd say. "They'll circle back when they need you." But Frank was gone, and the circling back had never happened. Instead, the distance had grown, the dismissals more blatant, culminating in this weekend's abandonment. I finished my tea and stood, decision made. I would not call a taxi. I would not scurry home like an unwanted burden. I would not continue this pattern of seeking approval from 3 adults who clearly saw me as an inconvenience. I walked outside, drawn to the old tractor in the yard. It was a Ford model from the 1950s, similar to one my grandfather had used on his small Nebraska farm. I'd spent childhood summers on that farm, learning to drive the tractor before I could reach the pedals properly. Grandpa standing behind me, his hands ready to take over if needed. "Machines don't care how old you are, Maggie," he'd say. "They just care if you know what you're doing." I circled the tractor, assessing its condition. Rusty but solid, tires weathered but intact. I climbed up, settling onto the metal seat, hands automatically finding the steering wheel. The key was in the ignition. On impulse I turned it, surprised when the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Someone had maintained this old machine despite its appearance. The vibration beneath me felt strangely comforting, the rumble of the engine a declaration of presence. I was here. I was capable. I was not merely someone to be left behind. I returned to the house with new determination, packing my belongings methodically. The photo album went into my suitcase without a second glance. Frank's binoculars, my medications, my clothes. Everything packed with precise movements. I cleaned the kitchen, removed all traces of my presence from the bedroom, gathered my belongings by the door. The note still sat on the kitchen counter. I picked it up, reading those cutting words one last time. You slow us down. On the back I wrote my response. I'm not slow.
I'm deliberate.
I'm not lost. I'm finding my way. Don't worry about me anymore. I won't be chasing your approval. I signed it simply Mom, then placed it on the counter. I took the cash they'd left, payment for a taxi I wouldn't call, and slipped it into my purse. Fair compensation, I decided, for years of one-sided giving. I took one final look around the rental house, a place that had briefly held hope and then crushed it. Nothing left of me here. Nothing to suggest I'd ever come with such desperate anticipation. Outside, the tractor waited, engine silent but ready. I secured my suitcase to the back with bungee cords from the barn, climbed up to the seat, and took a deep breath. The note in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. In a sudden decision, I removed it, reread my children's dismissive words, then reached down and tucked it into the tractor's engine compartment, letting it rest against hot metal. Let it burn there, I thought, like their words had burned in my heart. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. I released the brake, engaged the transmission, and began moving down the gravel drive. The tractor moved slowly but steadily, each revolution of its wheels carrying me away from abandonment and toward something else. Something yet undefined but undeniably mine. At the end of the drive, I didn't look back at the house that had briefly contained my hopes for reconciliation. Instead, I looked ahead at the winding country road, plotting a route to the nearest town. The journey would be slow on this old machine, but I had nowhere particular to be, no one waiting for my arrival. For the first time in decades, my time was entirely my own, my decisions uncomplicated by others' expectations. The tractor rolled forward, carrying me toward whatever came next. I was moving at exactly the right speed, my own. The tractor rumbled down country roads at 15 miles per hour, drawing curious stares from passing cars and the occasional farmer who recognized a kindred spirit. The wind tousled my silver hair, the sun warmed my face, and an unexpected sensation bubbled up inside me: freedom. No schedule to keep, no expectations to meet, no disappointment to manage. Just the open road, the steady machine beneath me, and endless possibilities ahead. 3 miles from the rental house, I spotted a small diner with a gravel parking lot large enough to accommodate the tractor. My stomach reminded me I'd barely eaten all day, and I pulled in, cutting the engine and sitting in momentary silence. The abrupt absence of vibration and noise felt disorienting, like stepping off a boat onto solid ground. "Now that's an entrance," called a voice from the diner's porch. A woman about my age stood wiping her hands on an apron, grinning broadly. Don't see many ladies arriving by tractor these days. I climbed down carefully, legs stiff from the ride. Not my usual transportation, I admitted. "Come on in," she invited.
I'm Mabel.
"This is my place." Mabel's diner was small but immaculate, checkered tablecloths and chrome-trimmed chairs straight from the 1950s. A few patrons looked up with open curiosity as I entered, nodding greetings before returning to their meals. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," Mabel said, handing me a laminated menu. "Coffee's fresh and the pot roast is today's special." I ordered pot roast and coffee, then excused myself to the restroom where I splashed cold water on my face, attempting to compose myself. The woman in the mirror looked unfamiliar, hair windblown, eyes clear and alert, a slight flush of color in her cheeks. I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked so alive. When I returned to my table, an older woman had joined Mabel, both watching the tractor through the window. "This is Eleanor," Mabel introduced. "She's asking if you're selling that Ford. Her late husband collected them." Eleanor extended her hand. "It's a 1953 Ford NAA, isn't it? Golden Jubilee model. Roy would have given his eyeteeth for one in that condition." I shook her hand, explaining, "It's not actually mine. It belongs to the owners of a rental property down the road." "Cassidy Place?" Mabel asked, setting down my coffee. When I nodded, she and Eleanor exchanged glances. "Those folks from Chicago bought it last year. Don't come up much." They mentioned maybe turning it into one of those fancy vacation rentals. Well, they've started, I said, explaining my weekend rental. I carefully edited out my abandonment, saying only that my children had needed to return early while I chose a more scenic route home. Eleanor studied me with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. So you just decided to borrow their tractor for a joyride? I flushed, suddenly aware how it might appear. I suppose it does look that way. I should probably call them and explain. Don't bother, Mabel said, refilling my coffee. Tom Cassidy's my second cousin. I'll let him know his tractor's getting some exercise. Where are you headed anyway? The train station in Madison, I said. It's about 30 miles, I think. Eleanor laughed, a rich, throaty sound. That tractor won't make Madison before dark, honey. And you don't want to be on country roads after sunset. My carefully constructed plan began to crumble. I hadn't considered the tractor's speed against the distance, hadn't thought about nightfall, or the increasing ache in my back from the metal seat. I'm headed to Madison myself after lunch, Eleanor offered. My car's a lot faster than that tractor. I'd be happy to give you a ride. I hesitated, torn between accepting help from a stranger and the impracticality of my tractor plan. That's very kind, but what about the tractor? I'll call Tom, Mabel assured me. He can come get it later. No harm done. And just like that, my grand gesture of independence transformed into something more practical but no less meaningful. I accepted Eleanor's offer with genuine gratitude, recognizing that independence didn't have to mean refusing all assistance. It meant making choices that served my needs rather than others' expectations. Over pot roast that melted in my mouth, Eleanor and I discovered we were both widows, both retired teachers, both struggling with adult children who had busy lives elsewhere. Unlike me, Eleanor had found purpose after her husband's death by running a community center that offered programs for seniors. Retirement doesn't mean irrelevance, she said passionately. We have so much to offer: experience, patience, perspective. Young people are so caught up in rushing forward that they miss the value of slowing down, of seeing what's around them. Her words resonated deeply. I'd internalized my children's assessment that my slower pace was a failing rather than recognizing it as a different way of experiencing the world. The worst thing, Eleanor continued, is when we believe it ourselves, that we're too slow, too old, too out of touch to matter anymore. That's when we truly become invisible. I told her then about the note, about being left behind, about the message tucked into the tractor's engine. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes reflecting understanding without pity. They've shown you who they are, she said simply. Now you get to decide who you are without their definitions. After lunch, I transferred my suitcase to Eleanor's comfortable sedan, leaving the tractor parked at Mabel's with profuse apologies and promises to explain everything to the owners. Both women waved away my concerns. Best entertainment we've had in months, Mabel assured me. Come back anytime. Next visit, I'll teach you to make my famous apple pie. The drive to Madison with Eleanor felt like conversation with an old friend rather than a new acquaintance. She shared stories of her community center, the book club she led, the container gardening workshop she'd organized. I found myself envying her purposeful retirement, so different from my lonely existence. Here's my card, she said as we reached the train station. Call me when you get home safely. And think about coming back for our summer festival in July. We need volunteers, and you look like someone with talent to share. I tucked her card into my purse, promising to call, surprised to find I meant it. We exchanged phone numbers, and for the first time in years, I felt I'd made a genuine connection with someone who saw me clearly. The train ride home gave me hours to reflect, to plan, to imagine a different life than the one I'd been living. I deleted my children's voicemails without listening to them, sending a brief text. I'm fine. Taking the train home. We'll call when ready to talk. Then I turned off my phone, unwilling to have their voices intrude on my thoughts. Arriving home late that evening, my house felt different. Not the empty nest I'd been rattling around in, but a space of potential. I slept deeply for the first time in months, waking with purpose rather than dread. The next morning, I called Eleanor as promised, then spent hours researching community activities and volunteer opportunities in my area. I discovered a literacy program at the local library that needed retired teachers, a community garden seeking participants, a senior center offering everything from yoga to technology classes. Days passed without contact from my children. Finally, Amanda called, her voice tight with controlled concern. "Mom, we've been worried sick. Why haven't you answered our calls?" I explained calmly that I'd needed time to process being abandoned at the rental house, that I was establishing boundaries for our future relationship, that I expected to be treated with basic respect rather than as an inconvenience. "We didn't abandon you," she protested. "We left money for a taxi. Would you have left one of your friends alone in a strange place with just money for transportation?" I asked quietly. "Or just your children? Would that be acceptable?" Her silence provided the answer. "I'm not asking for constant attention," I continued. "I'm asking to be treated as a person of value, not an obligation to be managed." Similar conversations followed with Brian and Carolyn, each initially defensive, each eventually acknowledging the hurt they'd caused. I didn't demand apologies or make grand pronouncements. I simply stated my expectations for future interactions and my intention to build a life that didn't revolve around waiting for their attention. Weeks passed as I threw myself into new activities. I volunteered at the Literacy Center 3 mornings a week, joined a walking group for seniors, and took a pottery class I'd always been curious about. I called Eleanor weekly, our friendship deepening through shared experiences and mutual support. When I finally checked my email after days of purposeful disconnection, I found a message from Tom Cassidy, the owner of the rental property. Mabel had apparently told him about my tractor adventure because his email began, "Ms. Wilson, I understand you took my tractor for a spin. No harm done, in fact you probably did it good to run the engine a bit. Mabel says you're a good soul who might enjoy visiting again. The house is yours anytime at a tractor driver's discount, if you're interested." I laughed out loud, then surprised myself by responding with thanks and an inquiry about availability in July, when Eleanor's community was holding its summer festival. The idea of returning to the place of my abandonment no longer felt painful. Instead, it represented the beginning of my transformation. By the time Amanda called to tentatively suggest a family dinner 6 weeks after the weekend debacle, I had a calendar filled with activities, friendships beginning to blossom, and a sense of purpose I'd been missing since Frank's death. I agreed to dinner on my terms at my house on a date that worked with my schedule. They arrived together, 3 adults looking somewhat chastened, bearing flowers and apologies. I accepted both graciously but without effusive gratitude. The dinner conversation felt more balanced than it had in years, with questions about my activities receiving genuine attention rather than polite dismissal. "You seem different, Mom," Carolyn observed as the evening ended. "I am different," I agreed. "I'm living at my own pace now, not trying to keep up with anyone else's." As they left, Amanda hugged me tightly.
I'm sorry, Mom.
"We were wrong." "Yes," I said simply. "You were. But I'm grateful in a way. You helped me find something I'd lost myself." Watching their cars disappear down the street, I felt no desperate longing for their return, no emptiness in their absence. Just a quiet satisfaction in the woman I was becoming, deliberate, purposeful, and finally moving at exactly the right speed. 6 months after the abandoned weekend, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined that Sunday morning when I discovered the empty house. My calendar, once barren except for doctor appointments and occasional lunch dates with former colleagues, now overflowed with meaningful activities and genuine connections. The Literacy Center had become my second home, my experience as a 4th-grade teacher perfectly suited to helping adults struggling with reading. 3 mornings a week, I worked one-on-one with people whose courage humbled me. Immigrants learning English, adults who'd hidden illiteracy for decades, teenagers who'd fallen through educational cracks. Their determination to improve their lives restored my sense of purpose, their gratitude for my patience reminding me that moving slowly often meant moving more effectively. MS. "Margaret," said Javier, a 40-year-old construction worker reading at a 3rd-grade level when we began working together. "Before you, all my teachers were always rushing. Too fast, too much at once. You take time, make sure I understand. Now I can read notes from my daughter's teacher. I can help with homework. This changes everything." His words healed something broken inside me. My pace wasn't a liability, it was a gift I could offer. My home reflected my transformation. Frank's recliner, which I'd preserved like a shrine, now served as my reading nook, piled with books I'd been meaning to explore for years. The walls, once covered with family photos that brought more pain than comfort, now displayed my amateur pottery efforts alongside landscapes from local artists. The guest room, maintained for years for children who rarely visited, became my craft space, bright with natural light and creative possibilities. Most significantly, I developed friendships that nourished rather than depleted me. Eleanor and I spoke weekly, our conversations ranging from book recommendations to political debates to the challenges of aging in a youth-obsessed culture. During July, I'd return to Wisconsin for her community's summer festival, staying at the Cassidy property, with a substantial tractor driver's discount as promised, and volunteering at Eleanor's booth teaching container gardening to apartment dwellers. To my surprise, Tom Cassidy had been there, a rugged man in his 50s with laugh lines and calloused hands. "So you're the tractor thief," he'd said with a grin upon introduction. "Mabel told me all about your great escape. Most excitement that old Ford's seen in decades." The tractor sat in the same spot in the yard, and Tom insisted I pose for a photo beside it. "For posterity," he said. "Not every day a retired schoolteacher commandeers farm equipment." We'd laughed together, the painful memories of my previous visit fading beneath new, lighter associations. The festival weekend had sparked an unexpected friendship with Tom, who shared my love of birdwatching and classic literature. Our correspondence began with emails about birds spotted on his property, and evolved into deeper discussions about books, rural living, and the complexity of family relationships. He understood family disappointment, having experienced estrangement from his son following a bitter divorce. "We're rebuilding slowly," he told me during one of our conversations. "I've learned to accept his terms rather than impose my expectations. Some connections can't be rushed." His wisdom resonated with my own evolving relationships with my children. After the failed weekend and subsequent confrontations, we'd established a new, more balanced dynamic. They called more consistently, listened more attentively, and most importantly, treated me with respect rather than tolerant impatience. Amanda had been the first to truly acknowledge the change in me. During a Sunday visit, she observed, "You're not waiting by the phone anymore, are you, Mom?" "No," I confirmed. "I have a life that doesn't revolve around yours, and that's healthy for both of us." She'd nodded, a mixture of respect and regret in her expression. "We took you for granted." "I took you for granted." "Yes," I agreed without bitterness. "But that's in the past. What matters is how we move forward." Moving forward included a cross-country road trip I'd planned for spring. Something Frank and I had always intended to do in retirement but never managed before his death. Eleanor had introduced me to 3 other widows who shared my interest in national parks, and we'd mapped a 3-week journey from Chicago to Yellowstone and back, with stops at smaller attractions along the way. "Aren't you nervous about traveling without us?" Carolyn asked when I shared my plans during a family dinner at my home. "Why would I be?" I responded, genuinely puzzled. "I'm traveling with friends, we've arranged accommodations, and we're all capable adults with decades of life experience." Brian looked somewhat chastened. "I guess we still think of you as needing our help." "I appreciate help when it's necessary," I explained, "but being older doesn't make me helpless. It makes me experienced." The dinner represented another milestone. The first time all 3 children had visited together since the countryside debacle. They'd arrived separately but made efforts to engage with each other as well as with me, sharing stories and updates without the constant checking of phones that had characterized our previous gatherings. As we enjoyed dessert, blueberry pie I'd learned to make for Mabel during my July visit, I reflected on how far we'd come. The abandonment that had shattered me had ultimately forced a reckoning that might never have happened otherwise. The note that had cut so deeply, "You slow us down," had ironically accelerated my journey toward self-reclamation. "Mom," Amanda said, interrupting my thoughts, "we've been talking, and we'd like to plan another family weekend. A proper one this time." The tentative hope in her voice reflected her uncertainty about my response. "I'd like that," I said carefully, "but with some conditions. Equal participation in planning and preparation. separate transportation so everyone maintains independence, and mutual respect for different paces and preferences. They agreed readily, perhaps too readily, but I chose to accept their sincerity rather than doubt their intentions. Trust, like all valuable things, would need to be rebuilt gradually. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee, Brian asked about the tractor story, which had become something of a family legend. I shared the details I'd previously omitted, the crushing hurt of finding them gone, the desperate impulse to take the tractor, the kindness of strangers who'd helped me find my way. "I can't believe you just drove off on a tractor," Carolyn said, torn between amusement and dismay. "I couldn't believe it either," I admitted. "But sometimes the most unlikely decisions lead to the most important discoveries." "Like what?" Brian asked, genuinely curious. "That I'm not defined by my relationship to you three, that my pace isn't wrong, just different. That there are people who value what I offer exactly as I am." A moment of silence followed, not uncomfortable but thoughtful. "I'm sorry we made you feel invisible, Mom," Amanda finally said. "I'm sorry I allowed it," I responded. "We all have our part in this story." As they prepared to leave, hugs were exchanged with new warmth. At the door, Brian asked, "Will you show us pictures from your road trip when you get back?" "I'll do better than that," I promised. "I'll start a blog so you can follow along. Eleanor's granddaughter is helping me set it up next week." Their surprise at my technological venture made me smile. So many assumptions about aging, so many limitations we accept without question. After they left, I sat on my porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the early evening darkness. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Spotted a pair of indigo buntings on the property today. Thought of you. Hope your family dinner went well." I smiled, typing back, "Dinner successful. Progress made.
No tractor stolen."
His response came quickly. "Disappointed. Was hoping for another great escape story." I laughed aloud, the sound carrying across my quiet yard. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined finding humor in that painful weekend. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined the life I was now living. Fuller, richer, more authentically mine than it had been even before Frank's death. Eleanor had been right that day in Mabel's diner. They've shown you who they are. Now you get to decide who you are without their definitions. I was still deciding, still discovering, still evolving, and that was the greatest gift of all. The next morning, I met with Eleanor's granddaughter to create my travel blog, titled Moving at My Own Pace. My first post told the tractor story, complete with the photo Tom had taken of me beside the old Ford during the summer festival. I ended the post with words that had become my personal mantra. Sometimes being left behind is the beginning of moving forward. Sometimes the journey starts when you stop following someone else's map. And always, always the right speed is your own. What about you? Have you ever found strength in abandonment or discovered yourself after loss? Has anyone else been left behind, only to find a better path forward? Share your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more about my upcoming adventures. Remember, it's never too late to start living life on your own terms. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope to see you on the road someday. All of us moving at exactly the right speed, our own.